I'd like to invite the man the NCLR editors call the Dean of Eastern North Carolina Poetry, James Applewhite, up to receive a token of appreciation in recognition of his Roberts Award for Literary Inspiration. And perhaps, too, he has some remarks he'd like to make. Maybe he'll read a poem for us. This is the poem he published in NCLR 2011 with ECU art professor Kelly Adams. So, thank you, Diane Rodman and Grace Horn, who had it framed for us.
You all have been a very patient audience. I will say a few things briefly. I'm very moved by what my former students have said about me, even about my own family, my grandfather. And he was a progenitor of thought as well as of tobacco. The poem that Tim read from was the first poem I ever had published, which was written on the occasion of his death. I was teaching at UNC Greensboro at the time. Came home and met my aunt in his house, and she told me how he plowed the two last rows with his hand plow in the garden, came in and died. And some things, when you hear them, are as vivid or perhaps more vivid than had you seen them. It became sort of part of the poem. That vividness which language can convey is part of what we're about here. It's part of what Tim called culture. It's this ability to take our experience and to bring it into the psyche that we have cultivated through many ways, through our life experiences, through our reading, through our learning, and see it meaningful, see it in relation to things larger than just ourselves or our locality, wherein we find in a poem a particular image, but it isn't just itself. It's a meaning-bearing thing. It has a resonance. It reaches beyond itself, just as tobacco had a history, reaching back to England, reaching back to those Jamestown fields where it was the only gold that they could find in the New World, and led on into slavery and sharecropping and the survival of that colony in the South. This remarkable piece of history that we are embodiments of. What I'm so heartened about tonight is this conviction that language and culture, learning at the highest level is possible, is being done here in Greenville, as it was done in Duke when I was a part of that faculty. It's all about the rapprochement between the cultivation of the mind and the experience that you've had in the world. It isn't enough simply to be in a locality and to feel that locality very precisely and vividly. You bring to it the experience of a human being on planet Earth who is a product of a very long history and lives on a small planet in the cosmos and wonders and seeks for meaning and thinks to find it, but needs in that search the language that others have spoken before. And no writer invents herself or himself alone. They are members in a series. Shakespeare inherited the five-part drama, the five-act drama, the mighty line of Marlowe. He had already at his hand a rich Elizabethan language. It goes on and on. But I'm telling you that that kind of language, that kind of knowledge, that kind of intensity of apprehension is not forbidden to us here in North Carolina. We are as alive in mind and as well in spirit, as inspired in our bodies and our languages as Elizabethan England. It's certainly possible. We are, however, the remnant of what is called a colonial culture. We existed originally at a distance from the center of knowledge and learning and excitation. And we're still working through that, but we've come a long way. Even in terms of economics, the region around Greenville flourishes much more relative to other distances in North Carolina. And I'm just going to close very briefly with a reference to my own beginnings as a poet and a writer, which were in Greensboro. I taught there immediately after doing an undergraduate degree, a brief MA at Duke. And a poet named Randall was there. And I learned the language of poetry from Jarrell. I learned these slant rhymes and these hidden rhymes and this concision and this reach for the universal. Jan and I just got a place in the mountains and in Banner Hill. I wake from a dream. I'd been walking on the ground slanting above us, looking out across a long distance toward a Baptist church in the distance with the fall coming on and the ground kind of turning colors from the mountain flowers. And I dreamed of Jarrell there. I think it was a kind of symbol of the rapprochement between literate knowledge, and I'm talking about serious knowledge. I'm talking about reading when you become the text. I'm not talking about reading on your Kindle or getting an email message or looking at your smartphone. I'm talking about the kind of reading you have to do to become a writer. You have to incorporate those former writers. You have to have a passion for the language that they had and learn that fire and that brilliance and that incision. You can't do it yourself. You can't invent yourself in one lifetime. You have to inherit those former lives. And for a moment, walking there in my dream, Randall was beside me, and I was remembering not so much what he was saying then, but what happened in my first year at Greensboro when I was in the student union and with a couple of other students, and Jarrell came in and read us his new translations of Rilke. And he was reading a poem called The Great Night, which is about how Rilke in a new city learns that city by feeling it, by turning it into language, by sensing the other lives. So I wrote this little poem, and I'm going to read that, and then I'll say goodbye. But I do want to thank everybody who's had a part of this. It's one of the great moments in my life, one of the consolations of growing, not old, but older. But I'm still here. But I dreamed that Randall was there. Randall Jarrell reads his just translated Great Night hanging before us. I, the new instructor among a handful of students in that Greensboro so long ago, it seems also a poem inside a dream. Then with his image beside me, I climbed the slope, suspending a mountain cottage. Randall's slight presence whispering of the land to come pink light near sunset. This slant across wild asters and thistles takes in the blackberry roughness and purples the substance of a granite rooting, as if into the evanescence of time and thought. Only then I noticed on our right the stones of graves from the church in the valley. The chiseled identities cut the tissue brightness, connecting our breathing on into a westward horizon. I remember his syllables falling musically precisely, conveying us into a different country, in a century now also only a part of history. That time was my time of literary awakening. It's part of history now. I think myself, I'm fading a little into it, but you all keep me here in the present, and thank you so much, Margaret, and everyone, and Tim.